Thanks, Pia. Good morning, everybody. I'm very sorry. As Jenny said, my last surname is Johansson, and I am married to a Swede. We used to actually have a house here in Luleå in Gamla Stad, but my Swedish is very bad. I have barnsvensk, so that's probably not appropriate for talking about shaping of the mining industry for the next generation. So thank you very much for letting me say and give this presentation in English. The rest of the sessions will be very helpful for my Swedish, so I thank you in return again. So thank you very much for inviting me. I feel very privileged to be here. Being able to talk to such an audience is fantastic. We at Anglo American, I don't know how much you know about the company, but we actually look to learn a lot from the Nordic mining sector. A lot of where our operations are in the Southern Hemisphere, especially in South Africa, in South America, in Brazil, Chile, and Peru, where we have a project as well. So we look to learn a lot, and I'm hoping I can use this session to learn from you around how you're approaching some of the more challenging areas that are facing our industry. So, the future of mining. What does it look like? I'm sure a lot of you are spending a lot of time thinking about this. If not, you should be. What does it mean to people when we say the future of mining? Mining always is seen as a sort of old industry. We talk about having a good heritage. It's 100 years. A lot of people's first impression is not really very sophisticated. We just dig really big holes. And is it really an industry that's going to be needed in the future when you have tech, Google, all these disruptive technologies? What role does mining have to play in the future? Are we attracting talent? Is mining the number one thing that graduates, when they go into university, are looking to go into? Probably not. But mining still has a really fundamental role to play as we go into the future. A lot of the metals, the minerals that we're producing are going to be used for whatever future people are envisaging, whether it's the low carbon future, the high tech future. A lot of what we produce are still going to be fundamental. So the question is what does the mine of the future look like, especially given the fact that society and its expectations are changing and evolving very, very quickly. So it's no longer acceptable that the extractive sector will go in and dig a big hole and take out the metals and then produce a lot of taxes and a lot of jobs. Society is actually saying, hang on a minute, we're not so interested in that. We want to make sure that you are smallest footprint possible, you are approaching things in the most responsible way, and the industry has had to adapt. And the thing with mining is, which is very different from where I came from in oil and gas, a lot of the stuff is right in people's back gardens. In oil and gas, you have the sort of luxury at the moment of still being able to go offshore, and that's not the case in mining. So at Anglo American, we spend a lot of time thinking about the future of mining, and I just want to give you a little bit of an overview of some of the things that we're thinking of in what we call future smart mining. So as we go forward into the future, we're really looking around how we can make mining as responsible, as safe, and almost as acceptable as possible. If my CEO were here, he likes to talk about comparing mining with agriculture, with farming. I think he wants to be seen as, farmer Mark, because in his view, farming and agriculture are fundamental and they're accepted. And society accepts that we need agriculture and, a nice pretty farm with some chickens, with some cows. Society accepts that and they recognize that. Nobody ever talks about, big industrial agriculture, but farming per se is much more recognized and accepted. So he wants mining to be seen in a similar way to the nice image of agriculture. So, what we're looking at in mining, we always say, picture this when we're talking to audience who don't really know much information about mining. But one of the things we're really focusing on is mining without fresh water. So where we have our operations in Australia, in Chile, in Peru, and in South Africa, water is a very, very scarce commodity. And of course, as many of you know, mining uses up a lot of water. So one of the things we're looking at is what can we do around the waterless mine. So looking at, dry processing, managing our evaporation ponds, and then of course one of the biggest uses of water is tailings. And so what we're also looking to do is to try to think about how we could conceive mining without the tailings dams. Could we do dry stacking? How could that work? How could we actually think about redoing what has been traditionally done for 100 plus years? Other one we're looking at is carbon footprint. Again, we produce a lot of, we consume a lot of energy. So how are we actually going to approach tackling society's questioning around how are you going to be a carbon neutral mine? How are you going to be supporting the climate change agendas for the countries in which you're operating? Climate change is very real, and climate change is something we all need to be working on. So we're looking and thinking about this in a much more holistic way, not just around how we're managing our operations from our emissions and our fuel consumption, but also around how our products can actually go in to the low carbon future. So we're working a lot around hydrogen fuel cells. Copper, of course, is the sexy commodity of the future in terms of electrification. So these are all things that we're thinking about in terms of how can we actually minimize our carbon footprint from a mining, a product, and a whole kind of value chain perspective as well. Shock break. How much % of the world's energy consumption do you think is used on comminution? This is the interactive part. Any ideas? The entire world's energy consumption, what percentage is used for breaking rock or comminution? How much? 13? No, not quite so high, but still. 4. Pretty good. Our numbers are 3%. So 3% of the world's entire energy consumption is used for comminution. I mean, that's kind of bonkers when you think about it. You are breaking rock to make smaller rock. So, this is something we're really sort of looking at and thinking, okay, we need to change how this is done. So we're spending a lot of time thinking around, how can we actually change the way we break rock? Again, it sounds like sort of caveman science. How do we change the way we break rock? But actually, from a mining perspective, it's going to have a significant impact to the way we do our business and the way we are actually managing some of our impacts. Oops. So, the one thing I haven't talked about in these slides, but is definitely something that we're thinking about, is, I guess in some ways, it's a really hot topic word, but from another perspective, it's a really scary word, and that is mechanization and automation. So, we're thinking about all these fantastic technologies and what they mean for us as an industry in terms of we're taking people out of very dangerous environments, we're making mining safer, we're actually being more efficient in how we're using big data, we've got sexy sensors, we're doing all this great stuff. But like I say, we're not operating in sort of the Western Europes of this world. We're actually operating in countries where jobs and low-skilled jobs are very, very important for the economy and the way the country is approaching its development. So what does that mean if we're actually looking at automating or using a lot more machinery in some of these activities? And this is very scary. On the one hand, it's great. We're not putting people underground in platinum mines, which are very dangerous environments. But on the other hand, that could mean that we're losing, 50, 60, 70% of the jobs. So what does that mean? And it sort of opens up a number of questions to us as a mining company. It's great that we're sort of all engineers going, must do better, must have better technology. But then there is this kind of workforce and societal consequence that we also need to be thinking about in parallel to all of these developments and innovations. So the 3 questions we're really asking ourselves is, well, preparing for the new workforce, what does the new workforce look like? In my company, I can honestly tell you, and the stats are out there, we still have a lot of white men in their late 50s who are making up the majority of the sort of technical engineering workforce. But then you go to our operations, and the percentage of women is still pretty low. So you have a very large gender imbalance. You also have people talking around, well, what skills are we going to need for the future? If we're going to be mechanizing and automating a lot of this stuff, what does that mean in terms of the skill set that we need? A lot of the arguments for women underground in South Africa historically have been, you're not strong enough to carry this big machinery. But if you're not actually having to carry this big machinery, it opens up opportunities to all sorts of people. I was talking to colleagues in BHP, and some of you may know BHP has put a gender target out there of 50% women across their business by, I can't remember what the date is, 2030 or something like that. It's very soon. And it's quite interesting when you ask Andrew Mackenzie, well, how are you going to do this? And he says, well, you need to completely rethink how you're approaching some of these jobs. So with a lot of the automation in Australia, the interesting thing about this is with all of these, control centers, they're actually finding that they're looking to recruit people out of the aviation sector in terms of air traffic control. I feel a bit like air traffic control right now. But interestingly enough, air traffic control has a lot of women in it. So all of a sudden, you're actually drawing from a sector that historically you would never have thought about in a mining context. So again, it's around how are we as companies rethinking, keeping our options open, keeping our minds open to the art of the possible in terms of thinking about the workforce going forward. Are we going to need engineers with 30 years of underground experience to lead teams of people who are sitting at consoles, controlling things with joysticks? Yeah, I don't know. So these are the questions that we need to ask. The other thing is we also now need to rethink around how do we redefine this kind of notion of shared value. So like I said at the beginning, we say as mining companies, please accept us into your communities, or please accept us to develop your resources. We might have some nuisance in terms of dust, noise, digging really big holes, but you know what? We're going to be contributing a lot of tax, a lot of benefits, setting up businesses, and of course having lots of jobs. Now the question is, if the job part goes away, what does that mean in terms of our kind of social contract with society and with the governments who ultimately are the owners of the resources? So that's something myself in my new role is having to think about a lot, is what does this definition, what is the value proposition of mining to a country in the future? The other thing is next is around the future business model. So what will mining look like in the future? What will our business model be? You have all sorts of things around the circular economy. You look at what's happening, the big disruptors. I'm sure everybody sort of talked about this, but Airbnb, Uber, these are all service providers that have no actual assets themselves. So again, how will we, a very asset-heavy industry and sector, be in the future? And I think the only thing constraining how we could see ourselves is basically our imagination. So again, we're spending a lot of time as well thinking around what do we as an industry look like? Do we become an energy-enabling company because our products are used to enable energy and mobility? Do we become a metals and minerals services industry? So again, these are all things that are up there and that we're thinking about. Now, of course, sometimes these get overwhelming and we just put them in, I don't know whether this translates into Swedish, but we have this thing in English called the too hard basket, which is basically where you put all the things that are just too hard to think about because your day job gets in the way. But always the too hard basket needs to get dealt with, otherwise you're just not going to survive as an industry. Now, the one thing we've done at Anglo American, because we've started to do some of this thinking, and please bear with me, I know it's just after 10, I'm in a very Scandinavian environment where it's all very serious, but we've been thinking about our purpose, okay? So this isn't something that's sort of, airy-fairy and nice to have. It's actually something that our leadership team and our board have spent considerable time in the last year thinking about. And in March, we actually launched our purpose. And again, you sort of think, well, why did you need to launch a purpose? Don't you know what you're supposed to be doing? But for us, it was thinking about all the questions previously, what does the new workforce look like? What is our value proposition? And it's almost like, why are we here? Why does it matter what Anglo American does? And if we can't articulate that, it's going to be very hard for us to start having some of those conversations around these questions, because we need to really demonstrate why we're here and why we matter and what value we bring. And our old concept of
at Anglo American,
metals,
we see a
taxes,
world where you will
jobs,
barely notice some mines
that's
at
not
all.
our purpose anymore.
Yet
so
these
we need
mines
to start
of tomorrow
rethinking
will
about
continue
this.
to provide the precious raw materials
the other thing
our society
that also
relies
was a big
upon.
kind of revelation for us in thinking about this thing is, again, around the future workforce. I'm sure a lot of you have been doing the thinking around the millennials. They are the ones who are now coming into the workforce and thinking about what that means from a resourcing perspective and a skills perspective.
And that's how we
and when you
plan
look
to
at the research
continue.
for millennials,
with integrity,
a lot of them are driven by purpose.
with
They want to have
creativity,
purposeful, meaningful
with smart innovation,
jobs. And they're not tied.
and
So it's not I want a job
with
for
the
life,
utmost
but they actually want to
consideration
go
for our
to areas that
people
interest
and their
them and where they feel they
families.
can make a difference.
for our customers
So,
and our local
this will
communities,
hopefully work.
for the world at large, connecting people with resources. It's how we continue to drive our industry forward, pursuing better ways to mine and process that use less water, less energy, and ever more precise extraction technologies to reduce our physical footprint. It's also how we develop better jobs, a better education, and better businesses wherever we are in the world, helping to create a brighter and healthier tomorrow for our host countries and for the billions of people around the world who depend on our products day in, day out. That's why when we look to the future, we see a company whose purpose is clear. We reimagine mining to improve people's lives.
So I don't know whether that resonated with anybody, but again, when we first started on the purpose journey, everybody's like, really? Yeah, that's very American. But actually the debate and the conversation that we've had as a company has been incredibly valuable to get to where we are in our purpose. So much so that it is actually now fundamentally embedded in the way we approach our strategy. And it really does underpin all the different things that we're looking at in terms of initiatives and how we're going to develop and progress. And then just so it's there for you, so reimagining mining to improve people's lives. So again, I just wanted to leave you with that. And it's really, like I said before, it's about how we rethinking what this industry does and how we do it and what that means for society. And those are the big questions that we're going to have to really address going forward. So that's kind of where we got to with the purpose. And so, well, what does that mean? It's great to have our nice tagline. We can put it on all sorts of merchandise, t-shirts, things like that. But we now need to really ground it and make it meaningful.
At Anglo American,
one of the things we also launched this year, which I'm heavily involved in, is our sustainability strategy.
The blueprint
now again, we may be seen as sort of late coming to the party on the whole sustainability strategy.
Anglo-American
I think a lot of the work that we've been doing historically has been around the sustainability space. It just hasn't been kind of put together in a sort of overarching strategy that really looks at how the company is going to drive forward. So again, here it's really to deliver transformational strategy to create long-term value for Anglo-American and our stakeholders, and it's intended to be a source of organisational identity, employee pride and competitive differentiation.
Trusted corporate leader,
we're putting the sustainability, it's not a standalone piece, it's very much part of the Future Smart Mining Innovation Programme. So again, we have all the things I spoke about before in terms of waterless mine and how we're approaching things from the technology side, and the sustainability strategy really fits and is grounded in that.
The strategy is underpinned by a number of critical foundations, common minimum standards that apply across our whole business. These are essential to the long-term credibility and success of the strategy and our social license to operate. At the heart of how we will bring long-term development opportunities to the regions around our operations is what we call collaborative regional development. Through spatial analysis and planning, this innovative approach looks to identify the socio-economic development opportunities of greatest potential in a region, and then we work in partnership with a broad range of stakeholders to deliver those opportunities. The Global Stretch Goals are a key component of our strategy, and there are 3 goals supporting each of our 3 sustainability pillars, giving 9 goals in total. These goals relate to Anglo-American as a whole, at an aggregate level. They are deliberately ambitious. They will challenge our business to innovate and change, and we are mobilizing our people and resources to deliver them between now and 2030. However, a global strategy requires local action. To deliver our goals, each of our operating sites will develop their own bespoke 5-year plans. While these plans will be flexible and respond to an operation's local context, priorities and opportunities, they will all be aligned to our 3 global sustainability pillars. Holistic, integrated, and flexible. This is how we are building shared value for a sustainable future. This is one way in which we are reimagining mining to improve people's lives.
That video I always find quite challenging because it's all about, here are the 3 pillars, here are the 9 goals. It's sort of like a math question coming at you really quickly. But again, I think it's also sort of highlights the complexity of our approach in this. And it's not just we want to, just do schools and education, but it's actually thinking about all the areas in which we have impact and potential influence and trying to make those as meaningful and as lasting as possible. So why are we doing this? Again, I realize I'm talking to an enlightened audience where sustainability has very much been key in a number of your considerations here in this region. But again, it's just to really highlight, again, and it goes back to a lot of the things we were talking about before. So the shareholder value as well as stakeholder value, it's managing risk, and then it's about building trust. And I think the building trust piece is again, goes back to that initial question, what does shared value, what does our offering, what's our value proposition for the mining sector in the future? And trust has a huge sort of underpinning of that and how we have those conversations. Here is here's a diagram that nobody can read, but it looks good. But that really does just go over the strategy. And I just want to highlight, we have the critical foundations here. And that's really just, baseline. You need to be getting on top of your operations, your permits, meeting all of your targets. You need to have your human rights in order. You need to have your inclusion, diversity. It's just basic operational procedure. And we'll put up our hand very honestly and say, we're not there yet. So a lot of work needs to be done on the critical foundations, and we need to really improve in some of these areas. And here are our stretch goals. And again, these are around, the environment, around our communities, and then around what we call the sort of trusted corporate partner, corporate leader space, which is, I guess, for a lot of hardcore engineers, is a lot more fluffy and intangible. But it's how are we actually building trust? How are we actually talking about accountability? And what does that look like in the future for our industry? Now, I just want to spend a little bit of time here on the Collaborative Regional Development Plan, because this is something we feel is very, very innovative. It's not just about social investment in terms of helping a couple of small businesses set up. We're actually looking at the regions where we're operating and looking at it in a very holistic way. And we're using spatial analysis to actually understand the region's hydrology, soils, agricultural potential, all of these types of things, to actually understand what businesses could be set up in the future that are going to make the region more sustainable over different time horizons, 10, 20, and potentially 50 years. Because we know that our mines are going to close. Every day you're operating is a day that you're coming closer to closure. And we need to make sure that we're setting up these areas well enough in advance for mine closure so they're not dependent on the mine. So this is another way in which we're approaching the regional areas. And so it's not just around what's happening at the mine, but it's actually the bigger region as a whole. And so we're working with government, we're working with bilaterals, we're working with other institutions to really see how we can make the best of what that region has to offer to really act as a sort of economic convener and generator for that region that will then be independent even when the mine has closed. Now, all of this can't be done without partnership, and that's another thing I think we need to really stress going forward. And what does the mining industry look like in the future? It's got to be about partnership, whether it's between ourselves, with civil society, with governments. Partnership is the new normal, so to speak, because we cannot do these things alone, nor should we want to. So again, I think for the industry as a whole, we're used to doing some things in partnership, bit of technology, bit of R&D, but actually now looking at partnership in a much broader scale is something very, very different. One other thing Anglo American has been doing, which our CEO has been doing for a long time, even before he joined our company, is we're working with the church. Okay, so the Catholic Church, the Church of England, the Methodist, because again, in the areas where we're operating, the church is a very, very powerful convener. So a lot of our communities, the church has great influence, but it also means that we can work with the church to tackle some of the broader societal issues where our operations actually have some influence and some impact. So in my job, I never thought I'd be doing this as a mining executive. I spend a lot of time going to Rome, to the Vatican. That's a destination I did not think I would be doing. So again, it's just thinking out of the box on partnerships and how you can work with different stakeholders for, reimagining what mining does to improve people's lives, essentially. So my last closing thoughts are, in terms of preparing us, the mining sector for the future, I think change is the new normal. Mining has been like this for a long time with a bit of technology innovation on the sides, but we need to be really, agile in how we're adapting to change.